Hey everybody, just wanted to give a quick little overview of the Brownells G17 Gen 4 slide with the RMR cut. I purchased it recently. This is a G34 lower. I kind of just wanted an alternative with the 17 link slide, and I wanted forward serrations and didn't really want to buy a whole new pistol or have my 34 machined. So looked around and this was one of the options. And it also kind of got me out of having to deal with MOS, which the 34 slide was an MOS slide. So far, I have 250 rounds through it, so definitely not a long-term, crazy, detailed review, but kind of got a surface level understanding of it and wanted to give a quick initial impressions. As far as pros, I feel like it has decent overall quality. Seems close to being on par with Glock, and really, obviously shooting you're not going to tell a difference, but I really can't tell a huge difference, and it seems like a great quality for the price, so the value is definitely up there. I like the finish. It has a nice deep, seems I believe it's nitride finish, but it seems on par with what you get out of a Gen 5 Glock, kind of that darker color as opposed to the lighter Gen 4 Glock finishes that you sometimes have. Aesthetically, I think it looks really good, and it feels pretty good. I like the front forward serrations, like I said, that's half the reason I bought it. The other version, without the window cutout, has the serrations wrapped all around. Functionally, I think that's probably okay, but I didn't think aesthetically it looked as good, so I went with the window cutout version. As far as reliability, it's also been solid. Again, I've only had 250 rounds through it, so not a lot of rounds or experience with it, but enough to kind of get an overall picture and see that it worked fine. One note on that is initially I was using a Lone Wolf Alpha Wolf barrel, and Lone Wolf barrels are kind of notorious for being tightly chambered. I guess you could call it a match spec, but I was having some issues with reloads failing to feed and then failing to fire because it was out of battery. So I went and purchased a 17 OEM barrel, and since that's been installed, I've had no issues whatsoever. But even with the Lone Wolf barrel, it was fine with factory ammo. Just the specs on, I guess the variation of specs on the reloads was giving it a few issues. Another thing I like, especially compared to the MOS, is that your red dot sight is lower, closer to the bore axis. So it's not a huge difference, but you can tell that you're down close to the slide, and therefore your dot, you have a little bit less rise and fall on the dot through recoil. Another nice thing is you don't have to buy a whole new pistol. Basically, buy the slide, throw your red dot sight and sights and all your parts together, and you have a whole nother setup essentially with the same lower. So kind of like switching out AR uppers on the same lower, same principle, and for some people that's an easier option. Moving on to the cons, the edges all around are a little sharp. It's basically smooth cuts as opposed to a radius edge like on the stock Glocks. I'm sure that made the machining easier and cheaper. As far as feel, it's not too big of a difference, but it definitely is a little more harsh feeling. And one area that did kind of affect things as far as the overall use of the gun was in Safariland holsters. This edge here, because it's not radiused exactly like the stock Glock. Let's see if I can get that to focus. So that radiused edge, or the lack of radius on the edge, it would catch up on Safariland holsters. And initially, I think it's kind of the suede material on the inside, but initially it was having a real hard time holstering. So I kind of had to wiggle it in, and I think it rubbed off a little bit of that suede on the inside of the Safariland holster. But now it's working. It's just tight and not near as smooth as with a stock Glock. Additionally, I had another Safariland holster where it wouldn't engage the ALS. I don't know if that's because of it was the correct size holster and everything. I don't know if it was because the lack of a radius wouldn't let it seat fully, and then the ALS couldn't grab the ejection port. I'm not sure exactly what caused it, but it would not lock in, no matter how many different angles or ways I tried. So to finish out the build, obviously the slide just comes as a strip slide. I purchased a Brownells Slide completion kit. So what I did was buy the Gen 3 kit and then a Gen 4 recoil spring separately, which is what you have to do. Otherwise, I mean, all the Gen 3 parts are compatible with the exception of recoil spring assembly. But it all functioned okay. So I guess okay review of the slide completion kit from Brownells. However, the striker that came with it, initially I had a super heavy trigger pull, probably like, whereas a regular stock Glock is going to be like 5.5, 6 pounds, it was probably pulling around, if I had to guess, 8-ish. I don't have a trigger pull gauge, but it was super stiff. The pro of that is that it had a super crisp let off, but it was just a little too heavy for my taste. So what I started doing was, well, initially I bought a OEM striker spring, threw that in there thinking that maybe the Brownells Slide completion one was just a little bit heavier spring. That maybe took the pull down just a little bit, but it was still super firm. So then I took strikers out of other Gen 4 Glocks I had that had a little more use on them, and most of them were a little heavier, but I finally found one that probably brought it down to like maybe 6.5-ish pounds on the pull. So I don't know if it's an issue with specs and tolerances somehow creating a heavier pull, but everything else being equal on the lower, and trying this on several different frames. I tried it on a Glock 17 frame as well, this being a 34, and it was just a little bit heavier on the trigger pull. So I'm not sure why exactly that is, but it is what it is. Not a super huge deal. Also, in installing the sights, the rear dovetail was very tight. Not to the point that I couldn't get it done, but compared to OEM Glocks, it was actually like kind of a struggle to get my sight pusher to get that squeezed in there. And I actually did it with a couple sights because I had to explore some alternatives, which I'll get to right now. This is not really a pro or con of it, but having the slide, the RDS cut is nice and low, which I would say that's definitely a pro. The flip side of that was it was a little bit harder for me to get sights that matched up well. So initially I installed a Holosun 407 on here, and the Holosun's dot height is a little bit higher. And I had Ameriglow, I think it's 429. It's the same Ameriglows that everyone suggests for MOS equipped Glocks with the RDS. And those were okay with the Holosun. It was a little close on the coat witness. I definitely like more of a lower 1/3 rather than an absolute. It was a little close, but it still gave me, I guess you could call it like a little more than a third, but not quite a half or full coat witness. So it worked, but then I decided to throw the RMR here instead of the Holosun, and with that, it was essentially an absolute co-witness, which I'm not a huge fan of. So from there, I went to Glock OEM night sights, the steel night sights, and it just barely was below the body of the RMR, so I couldn't use those. And then I had these Trigicon HDs on another pistol, so I swapped them in, and I'll try and get a sight picture going here. That's a little awkward. So as you can see, just about a lower 1/3. I usually probably shoot it right about there. And then here is the iron sights. So with that, it definitely works. I prefer, and this is it's not out of the picture. You can buy specific height sights. To me personally, I find that green dot from the HDs a little bit distracting from the sight picture, but it's not bad. And I'm sure if I shot this more, I'd get used to it. But I like the thin blade and blacked out sights on the Ameriglows, so I would have to get on their site and figure out exactly what hide I needed to go with to make that work if I was going to keep this. But yeah, and again, with the hollow sun, it worked fine, so not really a big deal on that one. Overall, I think this is a good option for if you want multiple setups on the same frame and spending less money. I briefly looked at getting a different one machined, and I still think the total cost of this all in with all the parts is probably about the same as getting one machined. So it's a nice, again, the value is definitely there. Ultimately, I don't know if I'm going to hang on to it. I'm just a sucker for OEM Glock, and just the little things like the sharper edges and not being able to holster well. It's a little bit of a detractor in my opinion. But that's not to say this isn't a quality product. It just kind of didn't quite do it for me. However, I think it's definitely good. I do recommend it for someone that's just trying to get into an RDS setup easily, that has a pre-existing frame ready to go. But yeah, if y'all have any questions or anything, let me know in the comments.